Hi, everyone. It's me, Kathryn. I am back today with another No CD Live. I come on here about every month, every couple times a month, just kind of depending on my schedule and just what the other webinars are looking like. But I am so excited to come back on here and talk about my experiences and answer your questions in relation to OCD and just kind of giving you a background on my own experiences with OCD. My name is Kathryn Booth. I am going to be 20 soon, but I'm currently 19. I'm from San Francisco, California, and I'm a college student. I'm studying clinical counseling psychology with a gender studies minor. And I one day hope to become a social worker. So that's kind of what I'm looking forward to in the future. But why I'm on here today is I am someone who has greatly struggled with OCD for a majority of my life. And for quite some time, I had extremely debilitating OCD that really overtook my life and just my ability to function on a day to day basis, which was something that was horrible. And I think our society just completely disregards, oftentimes, the significant and often debilitating and even disastrous impact that OCD can have on an individual's life, which is part of the reason. Sorry, I don't know what that was. But part of the reason why there is such a need for OCD awareness and just having these types of webinars and lives and conversations. But I did a majority of my treatment while I was in high school. So I've gotten to the point in my OCD recovery, and now I'm finishing my sophomore year of college, and in the fall I'll be a junior. So I've been at a point where I've been doing ERP since I was in ninth grade. So when I was like 14, 15, I started doing ERP, and it has tremendously helped me to take back my life and go away to college. Currently, I'm at home because I'm on spring break, but just kind of offering a bit of hope. And just before I start answering any questions, I just wanted to emphasize that I am not a professional. I am a person with OCD who has that lived experience. So I'm answering from my own lived experiences and just the knowledge that I've accumulated over the years, but am not ethically or don't have the qualifications to be providing any clinical advice. I can guide you in potential directions for resources and just based on my experiences, what I know to be true, but just to take that into account. And I typically my strategy, because there always seems to be a lot of questions, I try to answer the questions that I feel like can generalize to most people and that I feel like I do the best job in answering just based on my experiences, because I don't necessarily want to talk too much about things that I don't know too much about just because I feel like I wouldn't be the right person to talk about those things, if that makes sense. So let's see. Okay, this is a great question. It's very hard for me to make decisions and not second guess myself. How do I learn to accept the uncertainty? So, this accepting the uncertainty, for all those who don't know, this is a very common struggle for individuals with OCD and is something that I've struggled with tremendously throughout my years of treatment. And even is still something that I struggle with today, being someone who's many years into their OCD recovery and is doing very well. It's still something that I have to practice on a regular basis. And I think one of the biggest things is OCD craves certainty. That's like the thing that OCD strives to gain and accumulate over time, is that certainty. And the thing about life is nothing is certain. There's always uncertainty, and a big part of OCD recovery and something that can really help you to progress and move forward is learning to accept the uncertainty, and over time, then learning to embrace the uncertainty, which is kind of embracing and fully um, emerging yourself into the OCD recovery lifestyle, which is something that does take time. And it took me a really long time to get to that point. But once I did get to that point, that was a huge win for me. And it's something that I've then been able to apply to many other situations in my life, not just in the OCD context. But like anything with recovery and with OCD treatment, whether it be ERP, and just sitting with the uncertainty and the distress associated with exposures and OCD and intrusive thoughts. And um, one big thing is just it takes time and practice. So I think the more that you do it, the easier it becomes. And I know that's so much easier said than done because I think it also I think the biggest thing with OCD recovery is going all in. I think oftentimes it can be really easy to just dip your toes in and really not want to go any further just because of the uncertainty and how scary it can be. But I think the biggest thing with OCD recovery and the thing that makes the biggest difference is actually going into your recovery full force. And I think that was something that took me a really long time to get to that point and really figure out for myself what was going to help me move forward. And a lot of people throughout their OCD recovery really have many, I guess, milestones to get through in the sense that there's like a phase of just really accepting what you're experiencing, accepting an OCD diagnosis, accepting that this is a legitimate struggle in your life. But also, a big part is accepting that you need help and beginning the treatment, but then also recognizing and really fully realizing for yourself what that treatment entails and that it is going to help you regardless of how counterintuitive it may seem. Because I think for often so many individuals, they would think in this situation, oh, certainty would help eliminate that. Just trying to gain certainty at any point possible is what's going to help my OCD the most. But really, that only increases the severity and strength that your OCD will just come back at. I think for me, a big part was just trying to, even outside of OCD contexts, really accept the uncertainty in other things that weren't necessarily OCD related. I think that was an easier thing for myself, was trying to look at it outside of an OCD context first, because I think that like with OCD, it's just so difficult and can be very in the moment, it can be so challenging to just step outside of anything or even see how something can help in the context of OCD, just because it feels like um, OCD often will distort our reality and just make a situation seem very different than it actually is. So I think for me, really looking at, I guess, it outside of an OCD context and just trying to understand and accept the uncertainty in those situations then helped me to better get to the point where I could accept the uncertainty in an OCD context. But it does take time and practice, but it's also so worthwhile, which is something that the more that it really shows that it's helping you and benefiting you in your recovery and you're making that progress, it's going to be easier to be like, okay, I can accept the uncertainty. I'm going to accept the uncertainty. And then also that whole idea of I'm willing to embrace the uncertainty. But I hope that that's kind of like a good way to start this off, just because I know this is something that so many people struggle with, and it's something I still struggle with myself. And I still crave that certainty in my life and just really want to grasp onto it at any point possible. But just that realization of everything is uncertain. Okay, let's see what's next. Um, let's see. Uh, let's see. Okay. What was one of the most helpful things you learned in therapy? That is really hard. I think there are so many things. And therapy has really made all the difference for me. And in the context of OCD, ERP, on it, just really gave me my life back. I think for so long, I was just so, I think I was, it's even hard to describe. I mean, just that place that OCD puts you in is even difficult to put into words. I was just so hopeless, and I did not think that anything would ever get better. I thought that my OCD, as severe as it was, that was going to be my reality for the rest of my life. And that was something that really scared me. And I think I didn't think that therapy would work. I didn't think that it was going to help me make progress in OCD recovery. I didn't think I would ever get to the point that I'm at today, where I'm living away from home, I'm at college, I'm doing really, really well, and keeping my OCD at a really manageable place. And I'm still challenging myself on a regular basis. But I think a really big thing is, especially at the beginning of your recovery, you really learn that, OCD exposures in exposure and response prevention, the gold standard treatment for OCD, you realize that you really only do contacts within that very structured therapeutic setting. And I think one thing for me, which really helped me to make so many breakthroughs, is that exposures don't just have to happen in that really structured way. And for OCD, especially given like the nature of your specific obsessions or your biggest triggers or your themes for OCD, um, I think that so many exposures will just occur naturally throughout your day to day life. And I think the biggest thing for me was realizing that those situations, which this was something that I learned definitely farther into my recovery, but it's something I really wish that I learned earlier on, is that those exposures and those opportunities to really challenge yourself can occur at any point. Regardless of your therapist being there or not, or whether that's like an assigned exposure for you to do at that time. I think that me really initiating those exposures for myself, and um, obviously is something that will take time to get to that place of just understanding how, oh my gosh, my dog is barking. I'm so sorry. But I think just getting to that point of really realizing that you can initiate these exposures yourself really can make such a difference in your treatment, and really allowed me to make many strides, especially in contexts that are really hard to replicate in a therapeutic environment. And that's something that I still do on a regular basis. And the thing is, I think for myself is just looking at it as, if the situation that I encounter that could be a really good exposure opportunity, if that situation just seems too out of reach, it seems too difficult for me to just face in that full fledged way. Just thinking of it in different like levels and looking at hierarchies. So whether it just be taking one tiny step in that situation, or doing something that would just increase my anxiety a little bit, that feels a little more manageable, even if it's not something really big that you would do in a therapeutic setting. Even those really small steps in that natural environment make all the difference. And I think that's something that really helped me in therapy. So um, and it's something that I continue to do on a regular daily basis, even though I have made so much progress with my OCD. I think that's really helped me to hold myself accountable in my recovery. Let's see. Okay. Okay. What are some creative ways to do exposures for someone with harm/sexual harm obsessions? I think exposures, I mean, for anyone who just has a creative bone in their body, exposures can be a really great opportunity to really utilize those creative skills. And I think there are so many things that you can do for different, whether it be harm, sexual harm obsessions. And I'm just going to generalize this to all contexts because I think there are so many creative ways. I I think a lot of people I've heard of this, like, playing games, creating songs out of intrusive thoughts. That's a really big one I've known for people, and what they'll do is they'll maybe, like, create, like, use a specific song that already exists, and kind of to that specific tune, they'll just put their intrusive thoughts in the place of, like, the original lyrics, and for them, and they'll just have to sing it, they'll have to talk it, whether it be saying the intrusive thoughts in a silly voice that's out of ordinary, all these different things, and whether it be then recording the song that you create with your intrusive thoughts and then having to listen to it. Um, there are so many ways. I know some people with their specific obsessions, what they'll do is they'll create uh like a bingo or memory game where they'll have to like match the specific things with each other. I know people who there are so many different things. I know there's some really great resources out there. If any of you are aware of Amanda, she runs an account on Instagram called anxiety OCD treatment. And she actually created, which you can find this on Amazon. She created an exposure coloring book. So she created all these different pages regarding different OCD themes, and you can color those in. Some people they'll create like a story, they'll have to write in detail, like a worry script about their OCD, have to write about the situation, have to write it out. And that you can even utilize, I guess, creativity in regards to that. I think there are so many things that you could possibly do. And one thing that I find particularly interesting is just seeing, I think, the thing that works best for you and even for yourself, if you're even getting into it, if it's just something that makes it a tad bit easier, or just makes it a little less how do I like just instead of just saying your thoughts out loud, making it, I guess, doing it in a different way can make it a little bit easier to approach and just make it more motivating anyways, because you're like, okay, this seems a little more interesting than just repeating my thoughts back to someone. But I think this can apply to all different themes of OCD, whether it be harm or sexual harm, whether it be sexual orientation OCD, whether it be pedophilia OCD, whether it be contamination, religious scrupulosity, moral scrupulosity, you name it. It could really be any theme. And there are so many great opportunities. Let's see. Okay. Hi, so glad to have you. I don't really know if I have an anxiety disorder or OCD, but I have thoughts that don't go away. I freak out. Um, these things are not supposed to be an issue. I think one of a really important thing to recognize is just how oftentimes there is a lot of overlap between OCD and other anxiety disorders. And obviously, I'm speaking from this not from a professional, but there are so many, for people who do think they may have OCD, my biggest piece of advice would, if you do have the ability to access these resources, on the International OCD Foundation's website. You can find different OCD specialists in your area, and more specifically, NoCD. They have so many incredible resources that make OCD recovery and these things just available at your fingertips. So, my biggest suggestion for anyone who does think they could possibly have OCD would be to consult with an OCD specialist. And one thing to acknowledge is that there are many individuals who say they treat OCD but don't specialize in OCD. And oftentimes, if someone specializes in a ton of different disorders, and OCD just being one of them, um, oftentimes that's not necessarily something to look for, and wouldn't could potentially be a red flag just because you want someone who really understands OCD and all its intricacies and complexities. So, my biggest piece of advice, especially in trying to find someone who really understands OCD and all the ways that it can present differently in individuals, because OCD has so many presentations as even just all the different themes, possible themes that someone could struggle with in regards to OCD. So that would be my biggest suggestion. And I know, like I said, the IOCDF has so many great resources, NoCD has so many great resources. And from there, they have, even if I know that therapy can be really inaccessible. So there, even from that, there are different books on OCD um, and just other ways for you to start learning more about it if you think it's a possibility. Okay. Okay. Throughout your recovery journey, what do you think is the most difficult part about living with OCD? That's really difficult. I think that throughout different points of my life, especially during my recovery, there have been different things that have been especially difficult. I think one like overarching theme throughout my recovery from OCD would be just sometimes getting people to understand what you go through. I think because OCD can be so internalized and even difficult for the sufferer to understand, let alone someone who doesn't struggle with the disorder or isn't going through the treatment. I think for me, it was really challenging just helping people to understand around me and just how isolating it could feel, because so many people just didn't get what I was going through. And I struggled mainly, like significantly, with my OCD when I was in high school. And I found that I was really lonely, especially in going into intensive treatment, and just having to leave school for long periods of time. And just also trying to explain to people what I was struggling with. I found that to be, I think, really, really challenging. Um, and just the loneliness and not feeling understood, which really made me recognize how important forming connections with other people who have OCD and how beneficial that was for me in my recovery and still is today. There were so many individuals, like when I went off to residential treatment when I was 15. I was a sophomore in high school. That was the first time I'd ever met other individuals with OCD. And although it was such difficult work, being able to make these connections with people who had really experiences, similar experiences to my own, made me feel so much less isolated and so much less lonely. And I think that really made recovery a lot easier. So I think the loneliness and just people not really understanding and trying to explain to people too, because there are some people, I think, also due to just the stigma and the presentations and misrepresentation of OCD in the media, can make it that much more difficult to explain to other people who don't have OCD what it's like to live with OCD, and the also coming to the point that they'll never fully understand what it's like if they don't experience OCD themselves. But I think also that people have the capacity to learn if they're willing and open to learning. And there's so many great resources that you can use to educate people. So I think that was one of my main struggles. And I hope that that can resonate with some people because I just remember and still experience this, just how lonely it can feel and how these connections can be so invaluable. And I know a really great resource is NoCD has awesome OCD support groups for different individuals, like identity based, but also specific themes and age based. So those could be some really great resources to utilize and just try to build that community with other people and create those connections. Let's see. Okay. What kind of treatment has been most effective for you? I kind of at this point, I feel like sound like a broken record, but for me, one major thing is exposure and response prevention treatment. I could not recommend this enough. I think there are often professionals who claim to treat OCD and don't use exposure and response prevention, and that's not a good thing. Exposure and response prevention really allows you to tackle your OCD in a way that's really effective. And for me, I think even before I started specifically exposure and response prevention, I was just doing general cognitive behavioral therapy. And while that can still help in some ways, it can actually um, not be beneficial and be more detrimental to individuals with OCD, especially a big part in uh, cognitive behavioral therapy is thought challenging, and that can actually be really harmful to individuals with OCD if they're trying to make sense out of their thoughts and really point out the distortion rather than just sitting with the discomfort and the uncertainty. So, just that whole idea of finding the cognitive distortion in the thought and alleviating that anxiety for yourself kind of goes against what's going to be most beneficial and help you to make the most progress in regards to your OCD. And I think that was something that it took me a little while to see how that could actually be doing more harm than good. But definitely, well, ERP, exposure and response prevention, is a branch of cognitive behavioral therapy. It's really important to do ERP specifically. And also, you can still do other things on the side. I know ACT, acceptance, and commitment therapy can be really beneficial for people with OCD, but still utilizing exposure and response prevention as the main treatment. And I think also, so I did specifically for my OCD, I did residential treatment, I did partial hospitalization treatment, and intensive outpatient treatment. And I think for my case, we realized because prior to that, I was going to therapy one time a week, I was doing my exposures, but just that wasn't helping me. And my OCD was too severe to the point where I needed intensive treatment and needed to be away from home and needed to be doing it 24/7 or just in an intensive setting and environment in order to actually make the progress that I needed to make in order to actually be able to live my life again and get to that point that I wanted to get to. And it was really hard work. If I didn't say that it was hard, that would be a complete lie. It was the hardest work I'll probably ever have to do, but I think that work has allowed me to get to the point where I'm at today. I am a college student, which is something for a while, just due to my OCD and the severity of my OCD, we didn't even think I would graduate high school. But now I'm a college student. I'm finishing my sophomore year in high school, or not high school, college, and just seeing that it was possible, and all that was because of the treatment and just my commitment to it and just all the help that I received, and knowing that without doing the work, I wouldn't be where I am today, and just how worthwhile it was, regardless of how hard it was. It got me to the point where I'm at today and will allow me to achieve the goals I want to achieve in the future. So looking forward to, eventually going to grad school, having a career, having a significant other, having a partner, and starting a family, just all things that are things that I really want. But for so long, even as a high schooler, while all those things are far away, I didn't even see the goal of graduating high school as a possibility. And just, I think ERP really gave me the hope that I needed and just the ability to persevere through everything that I was experiencing due to OCD. Let's see. Let's see. There's so many great questions. I'm just trying to find the ones that can generalize to the most people. And if I'm missing your question, I'm not doing that intentionally. Let's see. There are a lot of questions relating to specific types of OCD. Let's see. Oh, this is great. Do you have any suggestions for handling the waves of OCD? It feels like such a setback when it comes back full force. This was a reality that was really hard for me to come to. The idea that relapse is a part of recovery and is going to happen, regardless of how hard you work. And I think that that was such a scary thing to even accept myself, just because I think just the idea of putting in all that work and then getting to a point where you're doing really well and then facing that as Maria refers to it, that wave of OCD, can just feel so discouraging. And I think just knowing that regardless of, making taking these steps backward and having OCD come back stronger again, just knowing that you're not the same person that you were at the start of your recovery. And the idea that while you will still be struggling with OCD, and maybe to the same degree that you were before, you've also likely gained so many skills and so much more knowledge and insight about your OCD and your experiences with OCD that will allow you to really progress in your recovery in a more effective and efficient way. And just that insight is so invaluable. I think insight is something that's really, I think, not s- I guess is just such an important thing in recovery and needs to be recognized as important as it is, because I think without that insight it can be really difficult for an individual to just really navigate OCD recovery for themselves, and also those waves and relapses that may occur. But the idea of just knowing how to tackle an exposure, the idea of, even, if your OCD does have what I like to, if it ebbs and flows, just that whole idea of just having a better tolerance for accepting the uncertainty, sitting with your intrusive thoughts, really knowing just even the right, just how to navigate exposures and how to do them yourself, and just what it means. And also, I found for myself at least, is that farther into my recovery, when I do have these waves of OCD, when it comes back to in, a very forceful way, for me, I've also am can recognize it much faster, and just the signs for me, and knowing and recognizing when there are points where it is starting to get bad again. And I think, not for me, I think what happened is, when my OCD got really severe, partially that was because I didn't really recognize what was going on. I didn't know how to navigate it. And the idea of then going into these like setbacks later on, knowing how to navigate it and being able to cite it much earlier, that makes it so much better in just the recovery journey and process. And that's something that I really encourage you to look at. Just because you are struggling and having a setback doesn't erase all the progress that you've already made. And I think it's really easy to completely disregard all that progress and just all the accomplishments that you've faced. But I think it's really critical for someone to see all the progress that they've made and really give themselves that acknowledgement and, I guess, praise that they deserve, because you've come so far, regardless of a setback or not. It's going to happen to everyone. And it's hard not to see it as a personal fault, or not putting enough time or commitment into treatment, because that's something that I've felt before, where I'm like, oh, it's my fault that I've relapsed. And it's just something that's going to happen, especially with life changes, and just becoming more aware of it is really big. Let's see. Okay. Does anyone else deal with ruminating over things they wish they hadn't done and feeling stuck in the past? So, although I could answer this question really specifically, I think that this can apply to really every individual with OCD. OCD can attach and really develop into any possible theme of any possible subject matter. So, while it may not be one that's really commonly talked about, it can still occur because the biggest thing to understand is OCD um, targets the things that you care about the most, um, your morality, your values. And the whole thing that is so important to recognize is that OCD thoughts and obsessions are ego dystonic, meaning they go against an individual's actual desires and what they hope for themselves. So while someone may be having a thought about hurting someone, a harm OCD thought, that thought is not reflective of who that individual is. It's just a thought, and is not representative of an individual's moral or character or who they are as an individual or what they desire. Um, so OCD can really attach onto anything, whether I'm so sorry, my dog is barking again, but just that whole idea of latching onto anything of any importance. So that's why so many people, if they have a significant other or that life partner, OCD will really latch on to that person. Like new mothers having postpartum OCD and obsessions surrounding or any new parent, I should say, that those obsessions surrounding the child. And for me, something a lot of my OCD surrounded school and perfectionism. And just from an early age, I truly valued my education and just what I was experiencing. um, and I think that OCD, just due to what I valued and what I cared about, instantly latched onto that. And it's just important to recognize that really OCD can latch onto any thought, anything. And it really doesn't discriminate against anything or anyone. Let's see. Um, Oh, here, this is actually a great question. What are some resources I could utilize to help educate the loved ones in my life about OCD? I think there are so many things that you can, there's so many incredible resources. I think that's one thing that's really, that I've seen grow tremendously throughout the years, is just the amount of resources available for individuals for themselves to educate themselves on OCD and just what they're experiencing, and but also for loved ones to better understand their OCD. I know that the IOCDF, the International OCD Foundation, has so many excellent resources on OCD and especially on how to help a loved one who has OCD and really specific things and just ways to support them. So I would really recommend checking out them. I think if I might, I'm not sure if I'm incorrect, but I think no CD has potentially support groups for loved ones. Or maybe that's a different, there's so many resources though. I would also recommend on Instagram, there's an awesome OCD community, so many incredible individuals, whether they be those who specialize in the treatment of OCD or those who are OCD advocates and are going through recovery and struggling with OCD. And so many of those individuals can be places that you guide someone, especially loved ones, to check out their accounts, to read their posts, because there's so much information in them and so much value I've found in educating myself, and especially use referencing those to people, and referring people around me to those specific things. Let's see what else. I think one thing, let's see. I'm going to try and go back to some of the previous questions. Um, let's see. Um, let's see. Uh, um, sorry, I'm trying to find some questions that really go back to that. I think lastly, just kind of wanting to end it, maybe not with a specific, end the live with a specific question, but just wanting to generalize it, um, to the idea that really OCD um, can be beyond debilitating. But I think something that's so important to recognize is that there is so much hope, regardless of how hopeless it may seem in that situation, and how much it feels like you're what you're currently experiencing is going to be the same thing you're experiencing for the rest of your life. I think that's something I really encountered, and really experienced. I think I was just didn't think my situation would improve at all, and was really doubtful about whether ERP would benefit me in any way, whether I would actually make progress, whether all the work I was putting in was actually worthwhile. And I know how scary it can be. I know how hard it is. But it can just sharing that, it's so important and can really, really, really make all the difference. I know for a fact that I would not be where I am today if not for all the treatment that I received, and for all the work that I put in, into really tackling my OCD. And I think also because of everything that I've gone through with OCD, and all the work that I've put in to my OCD treatment, has allowed me to just gain so many new perspectives on the world, and just throughout different things, and just really my ability to persevere through difficult times. In reference to OCD, um, I think it's important to also know that, yeah, it can really be all encompassing, but you also have so much power to really fight against it, and really take back your life, and just gain that control back. And I just really wanted to leave you all with that hope, and just wanting you all to see that it is possible. And I think that that's something, I think I'll forever be grateful for all OCD treatment and ERP and all the different interventions that are out there to help individuals with OCD. Um, but I just really wanted to thank everyone for joining in today on my live, um, and just really just saying that you all, whether you're supporting a loved one with OCD, or whether you have OCD yourselves, it will get better, and that there is hope, and so many resources out there. Check out an OCD, check out their support groups, check out all the amazing OCD specialists they have, check out the IOCDF, and so many other great resources. I hope you all have a great rest of your night.